to guide us and to give us lofty thoughts and a way to share the life and the faith experience of Pastor Alquinta in a way to be of help and encouragement to our viewers.
Yes.
Thank you for the technical people helping us and help us to have a smooth filming. And when the program will be translated and aired, let it be a blessing for the people you will bring to there to watch it. Continue to guide Pastor Alquinta in his personal work with you and in his ministry. Bless his family here and also this project soon to be accomplished in Cuba. We thank you in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Just a moment to... My nose is running. Keep it here to be easily reachable. Dear Pastor Alquinta, thank you for accepting my invitation.
It's a privilege to be here with you today.
Welcome to the starting point.
Honored to be part of the Starting Point programming. Yes.
Thank you. Originally, you come from a very, very interesting and fascinating country in many ways. This is Chile. Yeah?
Yes.
Its geography is unique, incredibly long and incredibly narrow. How have you been able to keep that country? Because I imagine the inland nations wanted to penetrate, to reach to the ocean, and you have been able to keep them at bay.
Absolutely, absolutely. And geography has been helping. Of course, we have the Andes Mountains that keeps us kind of safe, between us and our neighboring country, which is Argentina. Our other neighboring countries are Bolivia and Peru up in the north. And Chile is very interesting. It's about 4,300 kilometers long and about 150 kilometers wide.
So narrow.
So, it's like a long ribbon down in South America. Affectionately, we call it the tie of America.
And I also imagine there are huge differences, climate and vegetation and lifestyle probably, because up north, I think you are quite warm and nice, and in the the south end, I think it's almost frigid all the time.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have
all the
different kinds of climates.
Possible.
Overall, we are a Mediterranean type of climates, but it is warm up in the northern part. We do have the driest desert in the world, desert of Atacama. And then, as you go south, you find the valleys, and that's where we have large production of grapes that we export worldwide.
I ate grapes from your country.
And other fruits and vegetables. We also export kiwis. Interestingly enough, they were brought from Australia, and because of the conditions of the land, they were able to be produced in Chile just as well. And so as we continue to move south, then it gets colder. Vegetation changes from non-existent in the north to shrubs and trees to pine trees, and then you get to the south where you have huge vegetation, lots of pines and that kind of tree that resist the cold and the
strong
snow,
winds.
There was strong winds, and then of course you go all the way south to the peninsula, all the way. Then you have Antarctica. We also actually, part of Antarctica belongs to Chile. So 1 million square kilometers of the Antarctica belong to Chile.
Just 1 million square.
Just 1 million square kilometers. And then we actually have an island that not too many people talk about. It's called Easter Island, or Rapa Nui, as we call it in our local language. It's very similar to the Hawaiian, not infrastructure, of course, but it's about, I think, the relatives, like cousins or relatives of the people that live in Hawaii. They speak similar language, they dress similar, and so a very interesting culture. Easter Island is known because of the moais, these huge stone structures that are overlooking the ocean, with these big eyes and whatnot. And so people have been trying to figure out, how they came about and so on and so forth. So Chile, I believe, is a country that has been blessed by God to be, to have different climates, different geography. You can be in the Andes Mountains in the morning skiing. You travel 120 kilometers, and in the afternoon you can be in the ocean swimming. So, absolutely.
Yeah. Historically, there have been some native populations prior to the coming of Spanish conquistadores.
Absolutely. The Spanish conquistadores, of course, history tells that they made their kind of like their base of operations in Lima, in Peru, and from there they expanded south into Chile and Argentina and so on and so forth. The Spanish came into Chile. However, the Chilean natives were very, well, in those days were not Chilean. They were just natives, of course. They were not easily subdued by the Spaniards. As a matter of fact, they war against the Spaniards for about 300 years.
300
and they were
years.
never defeated. The
Really?
only natives in the whole Americas that were not defeated by the Spaniards. Sadly, though, they were basically decimated. They were pushed all the way to the south. And nowadays, presently, we probably have no more than maybe 5,000 to 10,000 natives in the entire country. Yeah, they were decimated.
So that was, wow. The others have been subdued, but survived.
They survived. So yes,
you have been so heroical, but almost disappeared.
So in that regards, the kind of people that live in Chile, because the Hispanics, they basically decimated the native population, wouldn't have a lot of native
traits and blood.
Most of our heritage is either from Spain, Italy, and other countries. There was a huge migration after World War I from Germany and other countries in Europe. So we have a lot of people in our country that are descendants from Europeans. Same things happen in Argentina, by the way, not just Chile, but these two countries. But specifically in my country, not a lot of native people survived, and the ones that are alive, they're all the way in the south, deep in the south, and so.
So they are not able, they did not influence very much the culture.
They did not influence very much the culture, sadly. So we don't really have like a Chilean culture, so to speak. We eat Kuchen, which is a German dish, and we have, and so we're a myriad of different cultures in this country. Sadly, because many of the countries have their own culture, we didn't get a chance to have our own culture.
What about religion?
Religion, because of the Spanish came, they brought Catholicism. So we have about 92% of the population in Chile. They consider themselves to be Catholic or Catholic-oriented.
Yes.
So that is
recently the country is in the process of secularization, like Argentina or Uruguay or Paraguay, or lesser than that.
Absolutely. Together with Uruguay, Chile is
the most secularized.
One of the most secularized countries
in
South America, mainly because of two reasons. Number one is the economic affluence. There's economically, Chile right now is in a very secure footing as far as imports and exports, and as far as financially, people are very well off financially. So that's one aspect. And when people have all their needs met,
it's so sad.
They
rather than
feel
becoming
that they
grateful.
don't need exactly. So that's the one. And then number two, the other reason why I believe that this is happening in Chile is because we have different kinds of cultures coming into our country, and most of them are Catholic as well, and the Catholic Church really doesn't allow too much of a spreading of other denominations. They've been very influential with the government, even though we believe in separation of
yes.
government and religion and government. However,
but it was not that.
Yeah, underneath the Catholic Church is very influential, and so acquiring land, acquiring building permits to build churches, it becomes very, very difficult. So, yes.
Yeah. So you grew up in what part of this?
So I grew, yes, in this long country. I grew up in the northern part, in the north. My father had a construction business, and he moved around the northern part, and so we lived in the northern area. But then, because of some historical issues in our country, the financial situation did not allow people to build or rebuild or spend a lot of money on their housing and things. So we had my parents, when I was very young, they relocated a lot to Bolivia, Ecuador.
Really?
Yeah, they moved a lot, looking for of course
a more freer society.
A freer society, and of course more financial stability.
Yes, yes.
So I lived in Bolivia for a year, and then of course we had to come back. The weather in Bolivia is tropical weather. We were not used to that, and we became very ill, so we had to return. My mom and us three, I have two younger sisters, and my dad stayed in Bolivia. Then he moved to Ecuador, trying to support our family financially from outside. Yes.
Yeah. Religiously speaking, you are also Catholics?
Yes.
Do you have memories related to faith, prayer, mass, church?
Absolutely. So my experience with religion began at a very young age. My mom really wanted us to have, a religious foundation, and all she knew, of course, was Catholicism. So she brought us into the Catholic Church, and that's when I first began to learn about, the stories of the Bible and about Jesus and his love for us, and that really caught my attention, and I wanted to spend more time in church and speaking to the priests and learning more and more and more. And all of a sudden, by I think I was about probably 9 or 10 years old, they invited me to become an altar boy. So I was an altar boy for a couple of years, and learning and just being like immersed in that kind of a setting. It made my experience with God to become very, very rich and real from a very early age. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. You think that was typical for children of your age, especially for boys? Probably not.
Not typical. Not typical. I believe that my mother had to do with that. My mom, she's always been very faithful to God, even though as a Catholic at first. Now she's a Seventh-day Adventist. Now she's no longer a Catholic. But while she was a Catholic, she didn't want to be just a nominal Catholic.
She didn't. She wanted to be serious.
She wanted to be serious, and she wanted our family to be like that as well.
At that point, you had a very serious political upheaval in Chile, and you came to have a Marxist socialist government under Salvador Allende. When was that? 70?
70.
70.
In 1970, so I was very young at that age, at that time, I'm sorry. I don't remember too much of it, but in 1973, when that government ended because of a coup d'etat by the military, we were still in Chile. And so I knew about, I experienced at a young age, the suffering of going from that kind of a government into a very oppressive military, very restrictive, with curfews and all that. And so it wasn't really a very happy childhood, so to speak. And not just myself, for a lot of people. During the time of Salvador Allende as the president, things began well for the first maybe 2-3 months, but then there was financially, and the people began to feel, the lack of provisions and work, and so, the financial situation was really bad, really, really bad.
Excuse me, what actually, prompted that revolution? I don't know exactly. In some other South American countries, of course, there have been very corrupt governments, and all the riches of the country were in the hands of the few, and most of the people were living very, very miserable lives. And so, one can understand, of course, many times one bad thing was replaced by another bad thing, but was also the case in Chile. It was also a situation like that, with most people living in poverty and the few, controlling the resources.
That's what happened prior to Allende. And so he promised, everything for everyone.
Yes.
And that was very, of course, appealing to the people. And he didn't declare himself to be a communist or a Marxist from the beginning. And so it appealed to the people, but then later on, things changed.
Sure. He was not able to deliver what he promised.
Not able to deliver. And of course, I believe he probably has some opposition.
Absolutely.
From the establishment, so to speak.
Sure,
and so,
sure.
But so we went from the
one extreme to the other extreme, and back to the other.
Yeah, exactly. And that all ended, in 1990, with Chile now going back to democracy after about 17 years of military regime.
Pinochet. Yes. And those were also times of great, restrictions on freedom, disappearings.
Yes. It's been calculated.
Extrajudicial killings.
Yes, it's been calculated that about 3,000 people were executed during his time in power. And that's a very loose number, On the other hand, Chile kind of returned to become a prosperous country. It was during the time of Pinochet that, Chile opened the markets and became, a more, powerful trade economy. And so, of course, the price that the country had to pay was terrible.
Do you think the wounds came to be healed, or they are still?
You know how stories go from generation to generation, and also the negative input and sometimes even the hatred is transferred.
Yes.
And so you now have in our country people, young people, going to colleges or high school, that they didn't live that experience themselves, but their parents, they have, inculcated or transferred that information or hate to them. And so Chile is still very polarized. I believe that the army itself has regained the trust of the country. They feel that they were abused by Pinochet, but it was a slow process, until, because the military was, for a number of years, the controlling entity in the country, and so it was very hard for people to have a dialogue with the military, knowing that they have done some terrible things. Of course, in their eyes, it was something like that
justified to prevent a worse situation.
That was number one, and number two is because of the structure of how military works, they were given orders and they had to, comply.
Do you know what was the position of the socialist, of the Aryan, the government toward religion, and especially if you happen to know, because at that time you are not an Adventist, about the Adventist or the smaller churches?
So the position of that government was at the beginning open, but then it began to be restrictive.
Typical.
Yeah. So that's I think they play exactly how normally those regimes work. You know, very open at the beginning, everything is great, but little by little, you know, the freedoms are are taken away.
What about the military dictatorship?
Yes, they were only with the Catholic Church, with the Roman Catholic Church. It was very difficult for other denominations to really to do any kind of extensive work in Chile. It was basically the military and the Catholic Church, and so the Catholic Church became very influential in politics.
And probably they also, when everything was over, they also took the brand out of it because
yes, absolutely,
people knew. People knew.
Yes, and so
when the fear was over.
Yeah, and you know, even now, people have mixed feelings about the Catholic Church. It just depends where you are.
Sure.
If you're, if you're left or right, you have different
one kind of strong feelings.
Exactly, strong feelings about it. Yes.
Yeah. So it's not. Yeah. Unfortunately, too many times, political involvement diminished or limited drastically the spiritual ministry of churches.
Yes, and it created a culture that was very oriented to survival. Very individualistic. And so during the time of Pinochet, the pendulum moved to the far right, and so there was no social help, there was no social programs. Everybody was on their own, so to speak.
If you survive, it's good. If not,
exactly.
you are not good
exactly.
enough.
And so everybody was just worried about survival. There was no really and the only kind of escape to that was to go to the Catholic Church.
Yes.
So you see how things worked. It was a system where people were very much controlled by government and by church, and so that created in people just to know these two ways of life, So that's why it was difficult when other religions slowly began to appear. People looked at them, critically.
They had no experience, no history of religious freedom and pluralism in politics, in religion, in everything. Yeah. What happened to your own faith? Because as a child you were deeply devout.
Yes.
What happened to your faith?
So I continued to have a strong faith and wanted to know more about Christ as I was little, from ages probably 7 and up until probably 11, 12. Then we relocated to another country, and so that kind of changed things a little bit. And we moved around, like I said earlier, in other countries in Latin America. And so that, my faith began to suffer because of that. We were in the survival strategy, so to speak, and so it became more difficult. When back in, I think it was in 1980, my parents moved to Canada. My father had family in Canada, and because he was he was a businessman, he owned his own company. He was able to move to Canada with a visa to work there. And so we moved to Canada in hopes of kind of coming together with the family. Sadly, that didn't work out too well because of weather. The family had moved to another location. And so we ended up having to, we didn't have the resources to go back to Chile, because imagine, it's a long distance from Chile all the way to Canada. It's like from one
continent
to the other. And so we petitioned a visa for the United States. And so that's how at age 11, almost 12, then we moved into the United States.
So you came to the States that early?
That early, yes. That early, brought by my parents.
So by then you have been already in like 4 or 5 countries?
4 countries, yeah.
4 countries.
Yes. My dad began, tried to establish here again as a construction company, because that's what he's done all his life. And so we began a new journey. I went to, in my country I was going to private schools, but now in the United States I went to public schools. And it was in 1985 that I graduated from high school. And at that time, I had the opportunity to make a decision of either staying in the United States, but my heart wanted to see if I could make it in Chile.
Oh.
And so I made a decision that I wanted to study.
To make a try. To study back in Chile.
And so my father, he said, look, I will support you. However, you need to study, one of these 4 or 5 options of professions that he gave me, And so out of those 5, I chose business administration. So I went back to Chile, to the University of Chile, a very prestigious university. There are 2 main universities in Chile that are the most prestigious ones. The Catholic University, of course, and the University of Chile. And then there's others, but those are the top 2 universities. And so I had the opportunity to be there. I studied business administration for 5 years.
5 years?
With a minor in international trade. Because I was bilingual by this time.
Multicultural experience.
Exactly. And I began to work for companies and in the international trade. Chile being a very open country now, back in the 80s, to open commerce, open borders, and so being bilingual helped me when I graduated to actually have opportunity to work for international companies and travel a lot, and so.
Do you think you also got some entrepreneurial spirit from your father?
I believe so. I believe so. I never had the opportunity to do something
to run your own
on my
business.
own. Never that much, but I really have that spirit within me, and so I was able to use, the language, being bilingual, to work for companies that will, that were interested in coming and doing commerce with Chile, and so I finished my studies. And then I worked. Now, sadly, during that time, I also, left my faith as well.
You can say that.
Yeah.
Intellectually, you became an atheist, or just
never really an atheist, but I think like an agnostic, But let me go back, because in 1983, it was when we were introduced to the Adventist Church, and as an entire family.
Oh, what happened? How it happened?
We were in the States in 1980. 3 years later, my dad had already a company. He was beginning to be more connected and whatnot, and so we received an invitation to go to a Christmas program. And interestingly enough, this Christmas program was put on by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, here's something that I didn't know until 1983.
Oh.
We were invited to the Adventist Church. We went to the program. We met, with other Chilean families that happened to be there, and we became friends with them. And then my father told me that part of that, this is the second time in his life when he is in direct connection with the Adventist Church. And I said, I asked my father, why the second time? This is the first time that I know of.
Yes.
He said, well, the first time was back in Chile, back in I think it was 1967.
Wow.
1967, I was about a year and a half old or a year old. My father he was the owner of a school, a private school. And when he relocated from out of the country, he sold that school to the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Also for a school or
for a school.
For a school, interesting.
And so he sold his school to them. That was the first contact, and he never thought any more about it, until now it's 1983, and we come in contact with the Adventist Church again. Now this time, into a Christmas program and into the church family, and then we began to take Bible studies, and we were
as a family,
and we were baptized as a family in
As a
1984.
Wonderful.
In 1985, I went back to Chile to
Yes.
study, and
Mhm.
I went to, because the University of Chile is a public
Yes.
university. I didn't continue going to church anymore, and I kind of deviated
Really?
from my faith until later on in my life.
So for how long have you been in Chile for this, when you went you said 5 years.
So I went there, I studied,
You studied 5
I
years?
went back in 1985, and I lived in Chile until 2001. 2001.
So 15 years you have been
Yes.
there.
Now, on and off, I traveled. I came to the United States for business
Mhm.
because I was working for a company at that time, and so they had branches in the States. So I would come here often. My father and my mom, they lived in the States. I was the only one living in Chile at that time, so I would come to visit and whatnot. But my life was basically in Chile.
And your parents were steadfast in their new faith while in the meantime?
In the meantime, my mom, for sure, my
Mhm.
sisters, my dad, not too much,
Yes.
but my mother and my sisters, yes.
Interesting. Your mother, she had been so devout, so
Yes.
strong in her faith, and once she
Absolutely.
became an Adventist, she continued to be steadfast
Yes.
and devout.
Yes, I believe that. I mean, hers is a fascinating story, but as far as being committed and devoted to the Lord, she is the pillar in our family for that. We
Wonderful.
look to our mother for
Wonderful.
that. Absolutely, absolutely. So from 1985 to 2001 is the time period that I lived in Chile as a professional now. First as a university student, then as a professional. I lived
What
there.
were you thinking about faith at that time? Were you thinking Adventism and Christianity is over for me? Or you said, well, I need to make myself, to achieve. Now is the time for me to.
Exactly.
But I know that's the truth, and I'm going to turn back to that.
Mhm.
What was your thinking? It's over, or this? I have to turn to return to that. Do you remember?
Well, I remember that at the beginning it was exactly that. I really need to look after myself. I'm young and I
Just
need
for
to,
a time.
right. But interestingly, in 1999, I met this wonderful woman who is now my wife,
Mhm.
and it was because of her that the idea of returning to God, or the notion, became stronger. When I met her, we began to date. One of the things that she will always talk to me about was, look, I would love to, have a foundation for our relationship, and if we will, if we get married and have a family, I wouldn't want our family to be a
Faithless.
faithless or a nominal whatever.
Mhm.
I really want our family because she was searching also at that time in her life for.
She was also a Catholic, I suppose.
She was also a Catholic.
Mhm.
And so talking about that, And as we began to have a more serious relationship, and when we began to discuss marriage, I remember back in 1983, there was this one church that had made an impact in my life. It was the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And so I proposed to my wife and I said, Pamela, would you be interested in learning more about the church of my childhood, the Seventh-day Adventist Church? She'd never heard of it, of course, but she was open and willing, and so we went and visited one of the local churches and began to study the Bible, and became friends with the church community. And in 1999, we were in 2000, we were baptized. And in 2001, we got married, and then we moved to the United States.
So how it was for you to rediscover the faith, and also the Seventh-day Adventist Church 16 or 17 years down the road? You changed a lot. Probably the church changed in the meantime. So
it was an amazing experience.
Really?
It was like coming back home. It was like I
Homecoming,
never
You've never left. Really? You had that feeling?
It was like I never left. I came back to the church, and it was just like I remember. Now,
really?
This was in Chile, and I have met the church in the United States, but
still the same.
The same type of atmosphere, and that really caught my attention. You know, how this church family is, independent of where we are in the world, it is a very similar family. And so that really made an impression. And it made an impression on my wife as well.
What was the reaction of her family?
The reaction was that, they could not believe it, but they understood.
They understood.
Because, tradition is one thing, and in my country, maybe in others, Catholicism is more of a tradition.
Yes.
It's passed on from generation to generation.
Sure, it's part of culture.
It's part of our culture.
Yes.
But when her family saw how involved she was, and how this had really made an impact and a change in her behavior, in the way that she viewed life, and even in the way that we eat, and so on and so forth. So they began to see that it was all positive. And so at the end, they accepted it, and as a matter of fact, they not only accepted it, but they're very positive about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, not having been members or anything, but they're very positive about the church. Yes, and so, anyways, we became members of the church in 2001, and very soon after we decided to move to the United States.
What was your intention, or you as a family?
As a family, well, it was a difficult decision. Basically because in my particular case, I have moved from country to country for a long time, and we did not want that same experience for our family. And so we made that decision. If we were going to stay in Chile, we will never think about the United States or any other country again. But if we move to the United States, we will never go back to Chile.
It's for good.
It's for good. We will burn the boat. and so we prayed about it. We prayed about it, and we decided that it was best to come to the United States. And so we made that decision, and we came, and we've been here since 2001.
Yes.
And,
you told me that you came just the day before 9/11.
Yes. That was very interesting. We came the day before 9/11, and that's a whole different story, but it was, we saw the change of how things dramatically changed in the United States. But it was good that we came the day after, and not the day, the day before and not the day after. But it was overall a good experience for us to be now welcome into a church family when we moved into the States, We quickly connected with the Adventist church. As a matter of fact, I became very involved in the church as a church administrator. Because of my business background, it's easy for me to do that.
Sure.
And so I became involved in church administration.
I don't think you mentioned the region where you had your first contact with Adventism. Where was that?
It was
That invitation to
in
the Christmas.
1983. It was in the state of Washington.
Oh, Washington State.
Yes.
Beautiful place.
Excuse me. Yes, it was in the
Sure.
state of Washington.
It was a Hispanic church?
It was an Anglo.
Anglo church.
An Anglo church, yes.
Mhm.
And it was a community-wide event.
Mhm.
And so there were some Hispanics in that church
Oh, I
coming
see.
to see the
Have you
Christmas
ever
Eve.
visited that church again?
As a matter of fact, I did.
Wonderful.
I did a few years later. I visited back, and it was very pleasant memories. The church is exactly the same,
Really?
like when I left it. Yes. So
It was a city church?
it was a city church. It was in the city of Yakima,
Yakima.
Washington.
When you made a decision to return to the States, where did you locate?
So not too far away from Washington State, we moved to Oregon.
Oregon.
My parents had relocated from Washington State to Oregon, looking for a warmer weather, a little bit warmer.
But still pleasant.
Yeah, it's still pleasant. And so they lived in Oregon, and so we moved in with them at first, and then we became independent, and so we began to work for the church.
You began working for the church as a pastor, or in a different capacity
Yes,
before?
actually in a different capacity. I was the
Mhm.
church administrator, so it was an administrative capacity. So I worked for the church for about 3 or 4 years in that capacity.
In the treasury or
In some in
Finance,
financial, but
yeah.
also in the actual administration of the ministries
Yes.
within the church.
Wonderful.
The idea was that the pastor would be free to have the vision of the church, being up front, and he will spend his time
Yes.
in the preaching of the word and presenting the vision and moving the church forward. My role was to make sure that all the ministries were working properly and the finances were
I
working
see.
properly.
Interesting.
So
That
I
was
kind of took that burden off of him so that he could focus on
Yeah.
the spiritual and vision of the church. And it worked out really well. Interestingly, though, little by little, this pastor began to kind of invite me to give Bible studies, do hospital visitations. He began to disciple me, really,
Or
into
to mentor you
ministry,
into
pastoral ministry. And so I was doing a little bit of finances one day, and the next day I was visiting with the family. The next day I was giving a Bible study. And I began to really taste it, enjoy it. And all of a sudden, that became a calling in my life. We prayed with my wife, and we said, Lord, if you want us to be involved now serving in a pastoral capacity, you give us a sign. And let me tell you, never ask that unless you mean it. Because God gave us a very powerful sign that He wanted our family, us to be in ministry. Very, very powerful, very, very clear sign. And it was an evangelism. The pastor was invited to do an evangelistic series in Mexico. And I was to go with him to help him do Bible studies, kind of like in a support role.
Yes.
And so we were on our way to the airport, on our way to Mexico, the pastor, a church member, and myself, to do a 10-day evangelistic meetings in Mexico. And we are at the airport. I'm carrying, my suitcase. I'm carrying the laptops, and I'm carrying all the equipment that he needs, And we come to the counter to get our boarding passes. It turns out that he doesn't have a passport. So he can't go to Mexico without a passport. And we can't, people are waiting for the meetings to begin. They've done a great work of preparation. And so the pastor says to me, you were asking for a sign. This is your sign. Here's the materials. Go and do the evangelistic meetings.
So he threw up his mantle on you.
Absolutely. And all of a sudden, I'm on the plane on my way to Mexico, not knowing exactly what was going to happen.
Not in a supporting role, but in a central role.
Exactly. But God blessed us. We had an auditorium full of people, and we had a good number of people come and be baptized. And in that area in Mexico, a very remote area, that's, as a matter of fact, that was the starting point for a church plant.
Really?
In that area, yes. So the work began there. There was nothing
province?
before.
What province of Mexico?
It's in Oaxaca, Oaxaca, in the very southern part of Mexico. And so we planted a seed there, and we had about, I think it was like about 20 baptisms. They became the core group.
The core group for the future.
For the future. And now there's a very big and growing group of church members there. So.
Have you been able to visit them?
Not lately, but I hear about it once in a while.
In contact.
Yes. And so when we came back from that trip, that was in 2004, we said, Lord, now you have to open the doors because I'm willing to be in pastoral ministry. And in 2005, I remember it was the day after my birthday in December, my wife and now my daughter, and my wife was pregnant at that time. We traveled from Oregon all across the United States,
Michigan,
about 3,000 miles to Tennessee.
Oh, Tennessee,
to Collegedale.
So not far from here.
Yeah, not far from here.
Yes.
To Southern Adventist University, where I began to study theology to become a pastor. I finished those studies. I continued to go to Andrews University for a Master's of Divinity, and then when I finished that, the Lord then opened the doors for our family to serve in an Anglo church. Interestingly enough, not a Hispanic church, but an Anglo church, and so we served a church in Tennessee, in the city of Knoxville, and we were there for about almost 4 years, serving that church.
And this is your second.
This is my second church. In between that, I received a call to return to Southern Adventist University, not as a student this time, but as a faculty member, a staff member, to lead the Evangelistic Resource Center, which is a ministry at Southern Adventist University that promotes evangelism around the world. And the idea is we take our students on evangelistic mission trips to the many different countries. And so I took over the leadership of that ministry, and I was able to take each year with me about 100 to 120 students to different countries. So I had the privilege of preaching about, I think, 14 or 18 different countries, with taking the gospel and preaching and seeing many people come to the Lord. It's been a real blessing. So I did that for another 3 years, I think, and then
3 years.
and now in June of last year, we received 2017. We received an invitation again to return to pastoral ministry, and this time, to Atlanta. And in August of 2017, the Lord has opened the door so that we could be at Atlanta North, where we are serving now as the associate pastor for that church.
Our time is almost up, and I'm thinking on the last question. 2 questions. So you are still involved in evangelism, public evangelism. Yes. I think before long you are going to visit a country which has been quite closed country until recently.
Yes. Of course, evangelism has been a big part of my life. That's how I came into ministry.
Yes, yes.
And ever since, I feel this call to do evangelism. In Knoxville, we had a big evangelistic crusade with Southern Union. We put about, I think it was 6 or 10 churches together for a big citywide evangelism. It was a great experience. Then when I was in Southern Adventist University, I helped to coordinate a citywide evangelistic meeting with It Is Written. And now in my project is for 2020 to do a citywide evangelistic project here in Atlanta.
Wonderful.
With It Is Written again, with about 20, 30 churches. And in the meantime, we have a project with Southern Union and Georgia Cumberland Conference for Cuba. The idea is to bring the gospel there through education.
Education.
Many people would love to learn English. And so we want to take people from the United States, bring them into Cuba so that they can have conversational English.
Excellent.
Not grammar,
Yes,
but conversational
Yeah, they
English.
have their own teachers of that kind of English.
Yes,
What they need is conversation.
conversation. So conversational English and sports. And that's going to be kind of like the bridge to bring
Yes.
people into the church. And then the next stage is to invite all those people that will be interested to come then to evangelistic meetings.
Yes.
And so we have a 2-year project
3 years.
to do
Wonderful.
this. So 2018, 2019, and 2020 is the time frame that we're going to be working with evangelism in Cuba through education. We also want to build kindergartens and places where children can come and learn about not just about social studies and math and all that, but also learn about Jesus. So we're going to have daycares that are going to be daycares during the day, and then language centers during the evening to teach the Cuban people about God. And so I think it's a beautiful project, and we're praying that it will be very successful.
Thank you very much. God followed you. God was very patient over the years, over the decades,
Yes.
and now He gave you a flourishing ministry, and it's exciting to see what God is able to do in your own life and through your ministry. Thank you very much. May God continue to inspire and to empower you in your personal walk with Him and in your ministry.
Well, thank you very much. And may the Lord continue also to bless this program that allows people to get to know, people from other parts
Yes.
and other walks of lives and
Yes.
other cultures. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.
God bless you.
You too. Very, very interesting. Yeah.